Welcome back into the podcast. I'm excited for this guest because this is the man behind the man. He is Ben Johnson's agent. He is Rick Smith of Priority Sports. We're going to talk to him about kind of how this went down, how this whole process works, not just for Ben Johnson, but for NFL assistant coaches and future NFL coaches in general. And he joins me now. Bill Zimmerman, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Bill, great to be here. Now I can put a face to the Twitter page.
Yeah, I'm the one that's not Dick Butkus in that
Right.
picture. So
Exactly.
but first, let me just ask you, because I know you haven't been Ben Johnson's agent too long. I know he joined Priority Sports fairly recently. That's something that went down in the last few months, correct?
It was September.
Okay. So like I know for players, sometimes they'll have an agency that handles like contract negotiations, and they maybe have someone that does publicity that's different. Like for coaches, like when Ben Johnson changes agents and comes to Priority Sports, is that like all inclusive, or sometimes do they still have other aspects that handle other aspects of their career?
No, it's no different than players at all. I actually represented players for about 25 years. And we opened a coaches division maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And it's full service. It's literally no different at all.
Gotcha. So let me jump into this in terms of the process on how coaches get hired, and anything you want to share about Ben in particular. Fans would love to have it, but this whole process is interesting, and I know the NFL has changed the rules on this to try and slow the process down a little bit and try and give playoff coordinators, a fairer shake here. It's not just chaos the day the last game is played at the end of the regular season, but like in terms of how these coordinators have to balance things in terms of interviews and preparation with the change in the rules, like Todd Monken talking about how he doesn't like having to do it this way, but it is what it is. And what is this process like for you as an agent working with offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators who are potentially looking to become head coaches?
Well, you are correct. In the 6 or 7 years that I've been doing this, it's changed 3 or 4 times. I remember, my head coaches in the league are Dan Campbell, Dan Quinn, and now Ben Johnson. So in this situation, they've definitely prolonged the process. They made the first 2 weeks strictly virtual. There are no in-person meetings at all unless you are not affiliated with a team. So even if you're a non-playoff team, you still could not interview in person in order to give the guys still playing a fair shake. That being said, that's all really good in theory, but I would say the interviews and the coaching process is just one check mark over a lot of check marks. I'd be happy to go through those with you.
I'd love to know what those
Sure.
check marks are.
Sure. So basically, obviously the biggest resume you have is the work you do on the field. Ben being the play caller at Detroit, the Bears have faced him 6 times now in 3 years. So they have a really good feel on his intelligence, his structure, his play calling, et cetera. And that's probably the biggest check mark by far. The second check mark from them is the due diligence that teams do on your client. And as Ryan Poles stated, in the last couple of days, they went deep. They talked to former teammates at North Carolina. They talked to people at BC where Ben was a young guy working through it. Talked to guys at Miami. Talked to guys at Detroit. So they're vetting like crazy.
Okay.
And so that's the second big check mark. And then the third check mark is having that interview and seeing if the perception you have on him matches the reality, from the interview. But the interview isn't the end all be all. Believe me. At the end of the day, some of these guys are really good at interviewing and some of them aren't, and teams I think have gotten away from determining everything based on the interview. for sure.
Interesting. So you think kind of that extensive background check, so to speak, and vetting and getting you're getting to know the candidate before you even have to speak to the candidate.
100%, and the Bears did an exhaustive, not only on Ben, but, my God, and I'll get into the 18 interviews because people are misinterpreting that for sure. But yeah, I mean, that's just one check mark. And teams are doing a lot better about that, now.
Well, since you brought it up with the extensive list, and I think the request list was up around 20, 21 names, and like you said, they interviewed well into the teens. And I know the Chargers had a huge list before they decided to hire Jim Harbaugh, but we do usually see those 7, 8, maybe 10 kind of is what teams usually go for. Obviously, the Bears went for a lot more. And when I was kind of poking around the league, a lot of people kind of said it felt directionless. And obviously, I think you're going to disagree with that there. So what did you think about the Bears' plan
One,
here with so many?
I mean, I have to tell you, okay, I've lived in this town my whole life. Okay, I was going to Bear games as a little kid with my family. I've seen the old Bears. I've seen the dysfunctional Bears. I was a cheerleader for that. But this thing's changed, man. And if you're listening, if this is a Bear-centric podcast, which it is, let me be the guy that breaks the news to all the naysayers that this is the new Bears, 100%. And I absolutely give credit to Kevin Warren for allowing the family to really get a broader aspect of what is going on around the National Football League. You guys have to understand that an NFL building, I don't care if it's the Bears or the other 31, are the most really insulated places. Okay? They don't talk to 31 other teams. They really don't know. They hear, but they don't really know what's going on in those buildings. Okay? And I do. I talk to 32 teams. And the extensive interviewing process really is such a great learning experience. Okay. When you're that insulated and when you really don't have any idea what's going on in these other buildings, you've got 2 weeks of virtual interviews. Nobody's traveling, there's no logistics. You flip a link on and you start talking. The amount of information, the wealth of knowledge you can learn from talking to all those people is you can't get it in any other forum in the National Football League but a head coaching interview, literally. And you can get it in free agency too, from a player's perspective, but that's a whole different issue, and that's going 100 miles per hour too. And you don't have those interviews with the players. So the coaching side really is that one place. And the Bears did a tremendous job of gathering information, and I'm telling you, a whole lot's come out of that. Ryan and I had a conversation about that the other day, and how much they really learned. They never thought about that they can maybe incorporate a little bit into how they're moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you brought up Kevin Warren. So let me ask you about that a little bit, because I think Bears fans for years were frustrated with George McCaskey. I mean, you live in the city, you understand that, and I think part of that frustration came from George saying, "I'm just a fan. I don't know a lot about football," kind of thing. I'm just a fan like everybody else. Whether he's being humble or not, that's what he's saying publicly. And yet he's still the one responsible for assessing football operations and deciding if the general manager and the head coach are the right people for the jobs. And I think bringing Kevin Warren in, who's been with the Rams and the Vikings and the Big Ten commissioner and has such an extensive experience as an executive, I think really allowed George, and you tell me if you agree or disagree, to kind of take a step back, let Kevin kind of assess what's going on within the franchise, business side and football operationally. But yet, once those decisions are made, okay, they're going to retain Ryan Poles, we're going to hire Ben Johnson, and that's where Kevin Warren then takes a step back and lets football operations do what they need to do without interference from above.
100%. I mean, that's what this was able to, that's what the new structure at the Bears is able to do, is George can just sit back now as the CEO and basically take direction and take suggestions from people who have been around and from football people and make decisions accordingly. And Listen, they didn't blink on any of this. Okay, they didn't blink on the contract negotiation. They didn't blink on the process. They didn't blink on Ben Johnson. I mean, there was no walls put up. There were no impediments you had to walk through. George was well educated. Kevin did a great job of preparing him before it started of kind of where this is going to go, what the NFL looks like today, both in salary and structure. And I've got all the confidence in the world. And that's, if you want to get into what my job in this whole thing, okay, I'm the information gatherer. Okay. I'm the guy who has to lead the horse to the water. Okay. And then the horse has to drink. So I am on the phone day and night,
I'm sure.
meetings, talking, vetting. And the Bears allowed me to ask every hard question that you and other fans have been able to ask. It never can ask directly. Okay. They allowed me to ask those hard questions. And I wasn't shy. I went down to the core of everything. And they were not offended by it. They allowed me to ask the questions. And what I found in this process is there's a tremendous amount of self-awareness going on at Hallis Hall. They understand the mistakes they've made. I believe in human nature that you don't double and triple down on mistakes, after 3 years. And I think they are absolutely ready to tie themselves at the hip with this new head coach, that this new head coach has a absolute clear vision of the type of player he needs, how to be successful, how to structure it to be successful. And I think they'll be great. The front office will be great partners with the head coach together, moving forward, getting the right personnel in there, getting the guys that fit. And it's not throwing darts. Like, Ben just came from a place in Detroit that had a clear vision of what they were looking for and have hit it out of the park. I think the Bears have that ability to do the same thing. And if I could, if there's any criticism of the last 3 years, and I'm trying to stay away from that,
Fair.
is that I don't think there was really a clear vision at all. And I think you now have it. Like,
gotcha. So when there's media reports coming out, weeks before the season ended, that Ben Johnson is looking for a franchise that's willing to understand the mistakes they've made and how they are going to correct those moving forward, that's where Rick Smith comes in to ask those hard questions.
Well, I mean, if you would like to know where all that came from, that was the narrative Ben and I set up, and I just planted it.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, that came out. I think it was the Thursday Amazon game after Thanksgiving.
Yes.
After Matt Eberflus had been let go by the franchise.
Yes.
That's where that started.
Yeah, and because my job also is to listen. I can't control the internet. It's just it takes there's so many branches to it. It's out of control.
Sure does.
but if you get the narrative out there, people will hang on to it, and that was important that I got that out there. That hey, I'm laying you out the answers to the test. So if you guys are interested in my guy, here's what we're looking for.
Here's the answer key, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you then. While you're talking about the media, let me ask you about this, because, you don't have to say anything in particular, but when I assessed the coaching situation for me in terms of where I thought there were fits for Ben Johnson after teams had made decisions about who they were retaining and who they weren't at the end of the regular season, I kind of looked at it. We heard about Jacksonville, we heard about New England, and we heard about the Bears. That was kind of the initial names we heard, and New England really pivoted to Vrabel quickly. And Jacksonville, I really thought that the Trent Baalke retention there, and I know they've changed. Looks like Liam Cohen's going to be there now, but it really felt like that might be an impediment for Ben to go to Jacksonville. So I kind of looked at it and went, I don't see any other place but Chicago. That's where I was originally. And then the Raiders pop up, and Tom Brady, we hear they let go Tom Telesco, and we hear that was specifically so Ben could get his own GM. And we hear that Brady really sold Ben, and Ben was totally into it, and Raiders. And it went from just kind of this rumble that, hey, Ben might like the Raiders, to it was just a roar going around the media, and people that really have, I think, pretty good information really all thought that Ben's number one choice was the Raiders. And, I mean, that's where I was on and posting it on social media as well. So like when you're talking about like you planted kind of the answer key right after Thanksgiving, like is that kind of the same thing to kind of look, Ben wants the Bears, but at the same time, you also need to kind of create a situation where there is some competition in terms of, getting the best contract for your client.
You know, so let's break that down.
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Okay. Initial gut reaction day one on the Raiders was no go. Okay. Tom Brady absolutely has a extremely compelling case
Okay.
that gets you to listen. Okay. The whole thing, bend to the Raiders, great sources, all the other stuff. No, that was never right. However, sometimes, again, going back to my job, sometimes things go viral that you're like, I got to put a break on this, and sometimes thing goes viral like no, this is good. I like this, and that viral thing was I like this. Let's just leave that out there. Okay. Ben made a decision Monday morning.
Monday morning after the Lions lost?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That was the first time we ever ranked the teams. The first time. We weren't ready to do that, and I wouldn't let him do that. Because the problem is, if you go in before I gather all my information, and those are numerous conversations with Jacksonville, with Chicago, with the Raiders, right? It takes a while to get all your questions answered. It's not one phone call.
Sure.
The goalpost is constantly moving in this thing. Okay, constantly. And it's several phone calls. And the Sunday night after the Lions were defeated by the Commanders was the first time that I was able to finally complete to make Ben a presentation and his wife, a presentation of all of the information, allow him to ask questions, allow him to be able to make an informed decision. He woke up Monday morning, called me at, I don't know what time it was in the morning, and said, call the Bears and see if you can get a deal done.
Wow. And you got a deal done quickly because that this obviously all came together really quickly. So, I mean, while we're talking about Ben, I mean, George McCaskey afterwards, said that Ben Johnson in the interview said, at the beginning and at the end, hey, I want this job. We even heard, rumors before he was even with you, when he was one of your clients, that this was a job he was monitoring last year potentially. I know Ben said, he wouldn't have taken the job if it was available last year. He wasn't ready or he didn't want to move his family yet. I don't remember the exact wording, but whether it doesn't matter whether he would have done that last year or not anyway at this point because it wasn't available and he's here now. But just with kind of all that, this is clearly a position since the Bears landed the number one pick last year. This is kind of at least a job I think he's been monitoring, I guess you could say, to see if there might be a potential fit there.
Yeah, you know what? It's like everything else in life. He 100% wanted this job. He 100% told George the same thing, and those were real words, And then it's gut check time. You know what I'm saying? Now it's like, okay, dude, time to make a decision, and that's where his mind and heart went back to. So no, he never wavered on that, but it was more me forcing him because these are monumental decisions, right?
Sure.
Monumental. He's 38 years old. It's monumental decisions, and I made him dig deep. And then he didn't waver. I mean, I think I never asked him, by the way, because I didn't want to. I didn't want him to, but his heart was always with the Bears, and it went back there when it was gut checked out.
All right. Well, let me just ask this one from a business perspective to an agent. When your client tells his potential future employer that he wants the job twice in an interview process, how do you keep, any ounce of leverage to try. Look, you want, obviously to maximize the contract for your client. How do you keep leverage when the Bears can sit there and say, well, he said he wants the job?
Because I've got 3 balls in the air.
What do you mean by that?
I got, the Raiders are interested. Jacksonville's interested.
Gotcha.
The Bears, I still have that, So at the end of the day, the Bears know. I mean, the Bears were always going to do the right thing. Like I said before, this wasn't a knockdown, drag out. They started low, I go high. They go up, I go down a little. We zeroed in on this thing like on both sides immediately.
Seems like it, yeah.
And we just tweaked it a little bit here and there, but no, it was not that. So leverage goes both ways. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, the Bears could try to leverage me, but then I could also go to 3 teams and said, put an offer on the table. And I'm like, well, this team's got this. I don't do that. That's not my style. I think that's a BS way of doing business. So basically I go 1, 2, 3, or whatever it is, and go to the first team he wants to go to, which was the Bears. And I say, all right, let's get a deal done right now. They know that if they can't, then I'm going to 2. So it's not a leverage game. It's a reality game.
Gotcha.
Do you know what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
Sometimes agents, think they're smarter than the world and they play fake leverage. But man, you get caught in that game, you're not going to have a client real quick. So,
yeah, sure. That could
no, this was perfect. His heart was with the Bears, and he never wavered off that.
Gotcha. Let me ask you a couple other things here before we wrap up.
Sure.
While you were talking about how you planted the playbook, so to speak, right after Thanksgiving, one of the other things we heard about was GM alignment. And while you can figure out some of what that is, it's kind of generic enough that I don't think anyone quite knew what that meant. And I think, when the Raiders let go Telesco, they're like, oh, well, that's what that means. He wants to start the same place with the GM. And clearly that's not the case because he's here with Ryan Poles.
Here's the way it is. Listen, I think for Ryan too, and Ben, the Bears set up an incredible process. It was so good. It was the best I've seen really in my time, because the first part of that interview was a one-on-one between Ben and Ryan. Nobody else was on that Zoom call. Then it shifted to the group, which was a great group, by the way. It was George, Kevin, it was Ryan, it was Jeff King, who's the unsung hero in all of this. Jeff King, who's, I don't even know what his title is, director of player personnel, senior, he is the unsung hero in all of this, because I represented Jeff his whole career. So he got me really comfortable really quick. And that was really the group. That was it. And Ted Cruz was the 5th. So when Ryan and Ben had that one-on-one, that was a place where they both can see if they were comfortable with each other. And when that interview concluded, the first words out of Ben's mouth was, I really feel comfortable with Ryan. I believe that I can work with him. So what GM alignment means is, here's what it means, okay? Everybody's in love with the guys they sign, right? Everybody's in love with the draft picks they draft.
Sure.
However, you have a new coach with a new vision, right? So if certain guys fit within that vision, great, let's roll. If certain guys don't fit within that vision, then you got to find guys that do. So is the GM going to be entrenched and basically tell the coach, hey, these guys are untouchable. These guys, that's not the coach's vision. That's the coach having to fit into the old vision. So alignment means that, can we build a football team based on this vision I have that I know is going to be successful? That's what alignment means. And is the GM willing to check his ego at the door, as the coach is willing to check his ego at the door, so that they get in the same boat and row in the same direction? That's what alignment means. Not picking your own guy. That is not what alignment means.
Gotcha. Yeah, and obviously that's the case. But yeah, you just saw media kind of speculating exactly what that meant. So
100%.
Let me ask you this: as Ben Johnson now he's starting to put together his his staff, and Adam Schefter's already reporting some potential coordinators that might be coming to Chicago with Ben. But at the same time, he loves Dan Campbell. He respects Dan Campbell. He doesn't want to try and raid the cupboard there and leave Detroit with nothing. So, like, how does that go? What are the challenges of a new, coach who doesn't, I know Ben's got a pretty good network, but he doesn't have a network like Pete Carroll, who, looks like he's headed to the Raiders, obviously, and has been a head coach for so many years. How do you go about putting together a staff, which is obviously an extensive coaching staff, when you're kind of starting from scratch?
It's a little bit of a difficult process because you have one pool of guys that are out of work because they were on staffs of teams that just were released. So you've got that pool of guys. Then there's a whole pool of guys who are under contract with other teams that you have to get permission, and oftentimes the teams won't give you permission to talk to those guys. So you have to putting your final staff together is usually a couple year process, not right now. That's why you see so many changes on staffs after the first year, because as your pool widens, you now may have some ability to get guys you couldn't get before. And you haven't until your staff starts working together. And as I say, when the bullets start flying, when the season starts, a head coach has to evaluate that staff. So that's why you see a lot of changes in the first year, because you just can't get everybody you want to get.
Gotcha. Now, I mean, in those, and you don't have to say specifically for the Bears, more of a general question.
Sure.
When someone like Ben Johnson, Dan Campbell trying to be, I know Campbell had the interim, but being a first head coach like that, when they're sitting down on that initial interview, like, is it usually an idea, hey, this is kind of who I'm thinking? I know you can't say for sure I'm bringing this guy because there could be contract issues, blocks, whatever it might be. Like, kind of having an idea at least who you'd like at like the top of your coaching staff. Is that usually something
100%.
Coaches kind of already have a plan in place for?
100%. And everybody knows there's caveats to that, but yes, some guys basically, go through a list of 3 or 4 guys for the coordinator positions, and then other guys will go deep into every position and have 3 or 4 guys. It just really depends on the coach. But, for me, for my guys, I think the most important thing is to get your coordinators in place, and then now involve your coordinators in putting the staff together, because that staff will work for those coordinators. I mean, your offensive coordinator is your head coach on offense, your defensive coordinator is your head coach on defense, your special teams coordinator is the head coach on special teams. You're the CEO who's overlooking all of it. So those guys need to have input, and it's just helpful to get those guys in place first and then start building from there.
Gotcha. I wanted to ask you one thing, and this is more of a
Sure.
general question, not anything
Sure.
specific with the Bears, and that's the Rooney Rule, because I think the spirit of it, I think it's a really good idea, and I do think it has helped in several aspects, but at the same time, we're seeing minority candidates really only coming from the defensive side of the ball. They're rarely coming from the offensive side of the ball, and we see more offensive guys getting elevated to those head coaching positions. Not extensively, not exclusively, I should say, but more, the majority are on the offensive side of the ball. And we're seeing, just teams check boxes without much of a thought. There's reports out how Jacksonville just manipulated the Rooney Rule so they could get Liam Cohen done. The Bears, I think the Eddie George interview was interesting because he's done a great job at Tennessee State. He was part of the Bill Walsh, coaching internship with Chicago, and give him a chance to kind of elevate his name in coaching circles. But, if I'm just being honest, if I just, see Pep Hamilton's name come up one more time in another year, like I just feel like it's not getting what the spirit of the rule isn't getting accomplished.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think a lot of the minority coaches feel the same. The NFL's trying. It just keeps falling flat on its face. And I don't really, I have 1,000 ideas for a different podcast, but it's just, yes, I agree with you 1,000%. I think this thing is failing miserably. And I think it's doing a disservice to minority coaches personally.
Yeah, it really has gotten. And last thing I want to ask you is, I'm
Sure.
curious, did you see the Kalen Kaler piece in ESPN about coaches, about agents and coaches and the coaching searches?
I sure did. Yeah.
Do you, as an agent of coaches, is that something, do you think there were valid points there? Do you think it was maybe overblown? I mean, obviously everyone knows the Bears did have a very close working relationship with Trace Armstrong. Ryan Poles is still in the building. But I thought it was an interesting, for fans that don't really know a lot about this kind of stuff behind the scenes. I do think it was interesting. I was just curious to get your reaction.
I guess the best way I can describe it is, yes, I read it. Yes, I think there was a lot of validity in it. And I just think we all have different styles. And the position I always took was there's plenty of coaches for all of us who are competing against each other in the business. And you got to do things the way you're comfortable doing, and the way, ultimately we serve our clients. So all I really care about is doing right by them. I don't pay a lot of attention what other agents are doing because I don't represent their players, nor do I care about what they're doing. I know I've been around this thing so darn long that I think I know exactly what works for me and works for, and ultimately it's the service to my clients. That's all I care about. So I do it different than those guys do it. And I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong. It's just different styles.
Gotcha. All right. Well, there he is. I could talk to you all day, but it's already been a half hour, so I'll let you go. Rick Smith, Ben Johnson's agent, the man that helped facilitate the future of the Chicago Bears into the position of head coach. Rick, thanks for so much time. That was a great interview. Really eye-opening. I really appreciate it.
Let's go with the legend, okay? I want to be known as the legend now.
The legend, the legendary Rick.
There we go. Beautiful. All right. Thanks, guy. I appreciate you, Bill. Thank you.
you.
All right. Bye-bye.